Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a man standing in a room once filled with laughter, now echoing with silence. The phone no longer rings, the doors no longer open, and the familiar faces have all faded into memory. He looks around and realizes there is no one left. No friend to call, no hand to hold, no voice to answer. Only God remains. And in that moment, the question is not why he was left alone, but what happens when a man has no one but God. True loneliness is not simply the absence of company. It is a stripping away of distractions, a collapse of the comforting noise that surrounds most of our daily existence. In the normal rhythm of life, people are rarely without something to occupy the mind: a conversation, a task, a plan, or a screen glowing with curated comfort. We fill our time with others, even if only digitally, and the quiet moments are often avoided. But there comes a time in many lives when this noise fails us, when the distractions run out, and when we are left to face ourselves in the silence. This silence is not peaceful at first. It feels vast and disorienting, as though the walls of the world have fallen away and one is left standing in the cold air of reality. This is the crucible of loneliness. In that crucible, illusions are burned away. The belief that we are strong on our own, that we are the authors of our own fate, that our worth is reflected in the attention of others, these are the first to fall. The man who once stood confidently in a room full of admirers may find that their absence leaves him hollow. The woman who once measured her days by the happiness of her family may find herself grasping for purpose when that family moves on. It is not that these affections and relationships were wrong or shallow, rather, they were never meant to bear the full weight of the soul. In loneliness, we discover how much of our identity was built on things that could be taken away. The experience is painful because it is honest. It forces the individual to confront the truth that all earthly things, even the best ones, can vanish. Friends grow distant, careers end, beauty fades, loved ones die. And in that place of loss, when the scaffolding of life has fallen away, a man begins to ask the deeper questions. Who am I really? What remains when everything else is gone? What voice is left to answer when all the others fall silent? This is where the crucible reveals its purpose. It is not designed to destroy the man, but to reveal him. When everything else is burned away, something remains, something eternal. The image of God, planted deep within the soul, long obscured by the dust and noise of the world, begins to emerge. For the first time, perhaps, the man realizes that he was not meant to build his house on shifting sand. He was meant for something more solid, more permanent. He sees now that the ache in his heart, the longing for presence and peace, was not a weakness but a pointer. It pointed beyond the temporary, beyond the flesh and blood relationships, to the one who made him. Loneliness, then, is not just an emotional state. It is a spiritual moment of exposure. It tears away the masks we wear and shows us what we are underneath, finite, vulnerable, in need. It is a doorway, one we do not choose, but one that, once opened, gives us the chance to walk towards something real. It is in that silence, that unbearable quiet, that the voice of God becomes clear, not always loud, not always immediate, but unmistakably present. The man who has passed through this kind of loneliness and heard that voice does not forget it. He does not emerge unchanged. He may still suffer, he may still be alone in the eyes of the world, but something has shifted. He has met himself, and in meeting himself, he has begun to meet God. And so, loneliness is not the end of the journey, but a gate. It is not the curse it first seems, but a gift wrapped in silence. Not all will pass through it, and some will flee from it their whole lives. But for those who remain in the crucible, who refuse to fill the void with shallow comfort, something sacred happens. They discover that they are not, in fact, alone. The world may fall away, but the Creator does not. When a man is left with no one but God, he may find, at last, who he really is. We are creatures remarkably skilled at convincing ourselves that we are secure. From early in life, we begin building fortresses of meaning around us: relationships, ambitions, reputations, wealth, routines, and the small rituals that give each day a sense of order. These things are not inherently wrong. In fact, many of them are gifts. The problem is not that we love them, but that we believe they are enough. We believe that if we accumulate enough of them, enough friends, enough praise, enough security, we will not be shaken. We tell ourselves that with a good job, a loving partner, loyal friends, and perhaps a few carefully managed dreams, We can insulate ourselves from the deeper questions, the gnawing sense of need that sometimes stirs when the noise dies down. But there is something deeply fragile about this arrangement. All the things we depend on are, in their essence, temporary. They are part of a world that shifts constantly, a world where promises are broken, bodies fail, and even the strongest bonds can weaken with time. We mistake these temporary securities for foundations, and we build our lives upon them as if they will never move. We build on health, only to be caught off guard by illness. We build on relationships, only to be devastated when someone leaves. We build on career, only to be undone when the company closes or our talents are no longer enough. These moments when our carefully arranged lives begin to tremble reveal how much we trusted in things that could never carry us. What we call stability is often just the absence of disruption. It is not true peace, but a kind of sleepwalking through life, assuming that things will continue as they are simply because they have done so thus far. We don't ask what holds everything together because, frankly, we don't want to know. We fear that the answer may unsettle us, but eventually something comes that strips away the illusion of tragedy, a loss, a betrayal, or perhaps just the slow, aching realization that none of these things have filled the void we were trying to quiet. And in that moment we are forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that we were leaning on what cannot hold us. There is a reason we so easily slip into this way of living. It is much easier to depend on what we can see, touch, and measure. Human love, social affirmation, financial comfort, all these offer visible rewards. They speak in a language we understand. The love of God, by contrast, often comes quietly, without spectacle. It does not flatter us, it does not beg for attention, and it does not promise to shield us from every sorrow. Instead, it offers something deeper: truth, endurance, eternal presence. But to receive it, we must often be emptied of the things we once clung to. We must see them clearly, not as evil, but as insufficient. We must be willing to stop pretending that we are safe because of our circumstances. This is not to suggest that we should reject human relationships or the gifts of this world. On the contrary, we are meant to love and be loved, to work and to build, to laugh and to celebrate. But we are also meant to understand the limits of these things. They are not our gods. They are not our rescue. When we treat them as such, we place upon them a weight they cannot bear, and when they collapse, as they inevitably do, the fault line runs straight through us. The pain we feel in those moments is not just from the loss itself, but from the exposure of our dependence. And yet, that pain carries with it a strange grace, for it clears the fog, it makes visible what was hidden. It teaches us that the soul's hunger was never meant to be fed by comfort alone, and that there is a greater reality beneath the surface of our lives. When all we thought we needed is taken away, we see that what we truly need has always been waiting, not on the surface, but at the center. That center does not shift with time or fail with age. It does not leave when others do. It is not an idea or an ideal. It is a presence, a person. And it is only when we see the illusion of earthly sufficiency for what it is that we begin to hunger for something more real, more lasting, more complete. There are moments when life brings a man to the edge, not in the sense of danger or excitement, but in the quiet, terrifying space where everything he once leaned on has been removed. He may have lost friends, opportunities, love, health, or a sense of place in the world. There is a strange kind of silence in that space. It is not merely the absence of sound, but the absence of direction. No one is calling his name. No door is opening. The days are long, and the nights are longer. It is here, in this barren place, that the soul asks the question it never wanted to face: is anyone still with me? At first, it seems no answer comes. There is just the echo of one's own thoughts, the weight of uncertainty, the ache of being unseen. The man looks around and finds no hand to hold, no shoulder to lean on. The memories of better times only sharpen the loneliness. Even prayer, which once flowed with ease, now feels like a voice tossed into the wind. But something begins to shift, not quickly, not with a dramatic sign, but quietly, like the slow brightening of the sky before dawn. In this place where all others have stepped away, God does not. When all else fails, when there is no one left to perform for, no audience to applaud or advise, the man finds that he is not, in fact, unheard. God does not rush into the silence with noise. He does not flood the mind with distraction or drown the sorrow with entertainment. Instead, He draws near in a way that defies explanation. It is a presence, not always seen or felt with clarity, but one that holds. In the place where everyone else has stopped answering, he answers not with speeches but with nearness. Not always in words, but in a peace that holds steady under pressure. There is a quiet steadiness to God that becomes evident only when the rest of the world has fallen away. It is often only in this kind of desolation that one can truly begin to understand what it means for God to be an anchor. Before, God may have been a concept, a doctrine, a comforting idea recited in times of need. But now, in this emptied-out space, he becomes something more, a presence that stands firm when everything else gives way. The man who has nothing left begins to see that he still stands, not by strength, not by willpower, but because he is being held. He cannot see the hands, but he knows they are there, because something inside him is not collapsing the way he thought it would. The discovery of God in this way is not made in ease. It is forged in suffering, refined in waiting, proven in the silence. But it is precisely through this process that the soul comes to know what it could never grasp before, that God is not a supplement to strength, but its source. That he is not a background figure waiting to be called upon in emergency, but the quiet center of gravity that holds all things together, including the man who feels he is unraveling. This presence is not always comforting in the way we expect. It does not always remove the pain, fix the problem, or restore what was lost. But it offers something deeper, the assurance that even in the worst moment one is not abandoned, that there is meaning in the middle of the suffering, not just at the end of it, that someone is walking through it with you, not watching from a distance. When there is no one else left and God is the only one who remains, the man realizes that this only is not a lack, it is an abundance. It is not a step backward into emptiness, but a step forward into truth. And in that truth he begins to rest. Not because all is well, but because something deeper is well. He sees that the foundation he thought had cracked beneath him was never the real one. The real foundation had always been beneath that one, waiting for him to notice. He had been standing on the edge of everything familiar, and only then did he discover he was standing on something eternal. He begins to understand that when all other support is taken away and only God remains, he is not at his weakest. He is at the place where strength truly begins. When a man finds himself alone, truly alone, the silence can feel suffocating. The absence of voices, the absence of laughter, the absence of the subtle comforts that once surrounded him, it all seems to press in with a kind of unbearable weight. At first he searches for noise, for something to break the stillness, as if silence were a mistake that needed correction. He turns to memories, distractions, anything that will remind him of how things once were. But eventually, when all distractions fail and the silence persists, he begins to sense that the silence itself is not empty. It holds something within it, something he had not noticed before. The presence of God is not always loud. It does not often arrive in the form of thunder or spectacle. In fact, it seems to resist showmanship altogether. God does not force himself into our attention like the clamor of the world does. He waits, not because he is distant, but because he is patient. And it is in the deep quiet of isolation that this patience becomes visible. When no one else is near, when the rush of daily life has slowed to a crawl, when the man no longer has anyone to impress or persuade, that is when the presence of God becomes something more than a belief. It becomes an experience. This presence is not always emotionally stirring. It does not always bring comfort in the way one expects. Instead, it settles in like warmth in the bones on a cold day, subtle, undeniable, not always dramatic, but deeply real. It speaks without words, communicates without speech. It does not argue for attention, it simply remains. And in remaining, it changes the atmosphere of the soul. The man who once feared he was alone begins to feel watched, not in the way of being monitored, but in the way of being known. He begins to realize that he is not lost in the silence, but seen in it. There is someone else in the room, someone who has always been there, though unnoticed in the clamor of former days. In isolation, the false selves begin to fall away. The versions of oneself that were shaped by the expectations of others, by ambition, by the constant feedback of society, these begin to dissolve. In their place, something truer begins to emerge. And God meets that truer self with clarity. The man does not need to perform for this presence. He does not need to explain himself, justify himself, or present his best version. God sees beneath all of that, straight into the heart. and still remains. This kind of being seen is at once terrifying and liberating. It is terrifying because there is no hiding, but liberating because there is no need to hide. The presence of God in solitude is not always about answers. In fact, it rarely begins with explanation. It begins with awareness, and awareness that one is not alone, not forgotten, not discarded. The man learns that prayers do not always need to be eloquent, that sometimes the groan of the heart says more than the most carefully chosen words. And God, who understands the language of silence better than anyone, answers not with speeches but with nearness. This nearness becomes, over time, more substantial than anything the man had known before. It does not come and go like mood or emotion. It holds steady, even when feelings do not. There may be days when the man feels distant from God again, when the fog returns, and the silence stretches longer than expected. But even then, something has changed. He knows now that the silence is not empty. He has felt the presence that abides in it. He has discovered that God is not an idea for Sunday mornings or emergencies, but a constant companion, especially in the places no one else dares to enter. This kind of companionship reorders the soul. It teaches a new way of being quieter, more attentive, more grounded. The man no longer needs to chase noise or fear the stillness. He no longer sees solitude as absence but as invitation. And in that invitation he finds not only comfort but clarity. He sees more clearly what matters, who he is, and who God is. He walks differently, not because his circumstances have changed, but because he has. He has discovered the God who does not disappear when the crowds fade, who does not grow distant in the absence of company, who does not wait outside the silence but speaks from within it. When all human connections are stripped away, and a man finds himself without the voices that once shaped his sense of worth, a deep transformation begins to take root. It is not a comfortable process. The need to be seen, to be praised, to be wanted, these are deeply woven into the fabric of human identity. From childhood, a person is trained to seek validation from others. A parent's approval, a teacher's recognition, the admiration of friends, the affection of a lover, these become mirrors by which a man begins to know himself. He sees who he is through the reflection others offer. He learns, often unconsciously, to adjust himself to gain approval, to maintain acceptance. Even the most independent soul is not untouched by this. But when these voices fall silent, when the crowd disappears, when no one is left to admire or criticize, a strange kind of unveiling begins. The man is forced to meet himself, not the version others affirmed, but the raw, unedited soul that remains when all the filters have been removed. This is a painful meeting. He sees not only his wounds, but also the ways he has covered them. He sees the masks he wore, the compromises he made to belong, the parts of himself he buried to be accepted. In the absence of human affirmation, he begins to feel adrift. The question rises quietly but insistently: who am I if no one is watching? The answer does not come quickly. At first, the silence seems to echo back emptiness. The man may feel as though he is disappearing, as though he never really existed apart from the roles he played. But over time, something begins to stir. Beneath the silence, a different kind of voice begins to speak. It does not come from the outside, it rises from within, from a place he did not know was there. This voice is not demanding or flattering. It does not shift with mood or memory. It speaks steadily, with quiet authority, and it calls him by name, not the name others gave him, but the name that was his before anyone else had an opinion. This is the voice of God, not in thunder or spectacle, but in the stillness of solitude. And when it speaks, it names the man rightly. It tells him who he is apart from applause, apart from image, apart from success or failure. It tells him he is known not vaguely, not in generalities, but in every thought and flaw and hope. He is known in the places no one else has seen, and still he is loved. Not because he has earned it, not because he has performed well, but because he was made in love for love by a God who does not change. The man begins to realize that his worth was never meant to be anchored in the unstable waters of human opinion. It was always meant to rest in something deeper, more enduring. In the presence of God, he does not need to perform. He does not need to present a polished version of himself. He is invited to be exactly what he is: broken, tired, uncertain, and still worthy of love. This realization does not erase the wounds of the past, but it begins to heal them. Where once he needed others to remind him of his value, now he hears it in the stillness. Where once he feared rejection, now he senses a welcome that cannot be revoked. This new sense of identity is not prideful. It does not puff him up. In fact, it humbles him. He understands how fragile his self-worth had been, how easily it bent to the winds of others' approval. But now he has touched something immovable. He has found a self not built by the world, but revealed by the one who made the world. And with that revelation comes a quiet strength. He no longer needs to chase affirmation. He no longer fears being misunderstood. He has heard a voice that cuts through all others and tells the truth. And this truth gives birth to peace. Not the kind that comes from success or popularity, but the kind that holds steady in failure, in obscurity, even in grief. The man who has found his worth in God no longer fears solitude. He has learned that when all other voices are gone, the truest voice remains. He knows who he is not because others have told him, but because he has been named by the one who knows him best. When a man comes to the end of all things familiar, when the patterns of his life are broken and the people who once gave it shape are no longer near, he is faced with a terrifying yet profound freedom. All the scaffolding has fallen away. There is no longer an audience to impress, no schedule to keep for others' approval, no expectations pressing in from the outside. What remains is the raw, an unscripted space of simply being. This is not the kind of freedom that first feels liberating. In fact, it feels like chaos at first. Without direction, without affirmation, without even distraction, the silence roars. The man stands alone and asks, "What do I do now?" At first, the instinct is to fill the void, to chase after anything that will restore the feeling of purpose. He may consider building again, may look for something to cling to, may return to old habits, old dreams, even old lies, just to recover the illusion of control. But deep down, something has shifted. The previous structures are no longer trustworthy. He has seen how quickly they collapse. And something within him resists the urge to rebuild in the same old ways. The soul hesitates, even trembles, at the thought of patching up the old life with more of the same material. He has come too close to the truth to return to the illusion. In this strange and hollow space there arises a possibility he had not noticed before, the chance to begin again, not by force but by surrender. He sees that this emptiness, this painful stillness, is not just absence, it is space. It is room cleared out for something new, something not built by ego or driven by fear. And it is in this cleared space that God begins to speak, not merely with words but with presence, not as a loud command from above, but as a still whisper rising from within. This is not the voice that demands performance. It is the voice that invites. It does not threaten or coerce, it beckons. It says, "Simply come." The man who listens finds that God does not hand him a blueprint, does not spell out each detail of what comes next. Instead, God offers himself. He offers companionship for the journey rather than a map for the destination. He teaches the man to walk again, not run, not race, not impress, just walk. Step by step, slowly, attentively. And in this slow walking, in this steady listening, a new life begins to emerge. Not one crafted by the ambition of the past, but one formed by the presence of God in the present moment. The man begins to discover that his future is not a puzzle to be solved, but a relationship to be lived. He learns to be led rather than to lead. He begins to understand what it means to trust a God who does not always explain, but always accompanies. The man realizes he is not being returned to who he was before the breaking. He is being remade into something he could never have been without it. The pain, the loss, the silence, they were not just obstacles, they were necessary spaces where the soul was made ready for something deeper, something real. He has not merely survived the solitude, he has been transformed by it. He finds that new strength comes not from asserting control but from surrendering it. That wisdom grows not from knowing more, but from learning to listen. That identity is no longer something to protect or prove, but something given by grace. He does not need to have everything figured out. He does not need to move quickly. The voice of God is patient. And so he learns to be patient too. He walks with less certainty but more faith. Less fear, more peace. The storms may still come, but they do not shake him the same way. He is anchored now, not to outcomes, but to presence. This presence, quiet but unshakable, becomes the new foundation. It is not something he built, it is something he received. And it is from this ground that new choices emerge, not driven by pressure, but by love. He begins to rebuild, not as a man desperate for approval, but as one who knows he is already seen, already held. Each step forward is no longer a frantic escape from loneliness, but a gentle response to the one who walks beside him. And this walking, this simple, sacred walking, becomes the way home. When a man has no one but God, he discovers that he is not truly alone, but finally in the company of the one who never leaves. The absence of others does not signal abandonment, but an invitation to be stripped of illusions, to be known without masks, to hear the voice that speaks not to impress, but to restore. In the silence he meets the truth, in the stillness he is remade. He learns that the foundation of his worth is not built by human hands, but by divine love. The strength he once sought in crowds, he now finds in quiet companionship. And when he walks forward from that place, he does so not with fear, but with a quiet, anchored joy, because having nothing left but God turned out to be having everything he truly needed.